It's been almost exactly 11 months since I attempted suicide on this campus. It was the notorious year of 2020, and I had just spent the summer openly combating racism in our community. As a half-Black sheep in a mostly white family, I faced some ignorant backlash that really damaged my sense of belonging in the world. My grandparents expressed attitudes through intense conversations and social media posts that made it very clear that they didn't support the work that I was doing or the cause that I was getting behind. My aunts and uncles often dismissed the entire situation by saying that I wasn't even Black and I had no relevance to what was going on. My parents were supportive of me on the surface level, but as the election grew closer and political tensions grew, my parents revealed some unconscious bias that made me feel alone, completely alone. On the outside, it looked like I was this fearless activist. On the inside, I was dying. The summer months ended in a heartbreaking experience, which resulted in me completely ending my relationship with my biological father. Because of the previous months of mass protesting around the country, organizers decided to recreate the March on Washington, where Martin Luther King gave his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. It was called "Get Your Knees Off Our Necks," and it took place on the same day that it did in 1963. August 28th, which just so happens to be my birthday. I asked my mom to take the trip with me as my birthday gift. I absolutely had to go to this march. And so off we went. My biological father, along with many other members of the Black side of my family, lived near the area, so we decided to visit them, as I had never met some of these people and seldom knew my dad. I thought we would be maximizing our time together to make up for the last 19 years of a failed relationship, but I was wrong. Out of the 4 days we were there, he only showed up for 2. The last day we were in town was the day of the march, and things ended on pretty bad terms. He waved goodbye at me and said, "It was nice seeing you, Hannah," as if I was just some person he didn't know. And maybe I was. The year had worn on me to no doubt. By the fall, I was working 2 jobs to make sure I wouldn't have to financially depend on anyone in my family, but in turn, I was failing most of my online classes. I had formed a serious drug addiction to Adderall to keep me awake for when I worked day shifts at the mall and night shifts at a local homeless shelter throughout the entire weekend. I had also started to consistently drink, smoke weed, and take MDMA. Whether it was a night of going out with my friends or staying inside and watching TV, being high was the only time I was able to let my guard down and feel the emotions I had buried deep inside of me. At this point, school, which had always been my home to foster my love for learning and education, seemed unachievable and out of reach. I lost myself and broke connections with most of my friends. On November 25th of 2020, I gave up on my family, myself, and the rest of the world. My suicide attempt left me hospitalized, and while I was there, a social worker came in to visit me. She told me that since this was my 3rd attempt, I would be forced to go inpatient at a psychiatric hospital. My first day there was Thanksgiving, and it was the first Thanksgiving that went by where I didn't see a single person in my family. But if I'm being honest, I didn't really care. The only thing I cared about was making sure I was able to leave so that I could fulfill my duty as a manager at the mall on Black Friday. I signed myself AMA, or Against Medical Advice, for my release from the facility. As I started preparing for what would be the biggest shopping event that would occur in 24 hours, I started to feel something rot inside me. I had always loved working at Pink, but after the COVID-19 pandemic, it just wasn't the same. Just the thought of having to control the capacity of the store or ask customers to put their masks on gave me such a heightened anxiety. Suddenly, I became so overwhelmed. It was as if this ginormous wave swallowed me whole, leaving me without any oxygen to relieve this engulfing weight on my chest. That's when I realized that overworking myself and not listening to my body was part of the slippery slope that got me here to start with. Suddenly, the idea of selling bras and sweatshirts didn't seem so important anymore. I began to wonder, when did I start putting myself last? And when exactly did I allow myself to become a corporate slave? I redacted my AMA and decided to stay at the hospital for treatment. Now, I tell you this part of the story not only to show you how absolutely stubborn I am, but also to give weight to the fact that admitting that we have a problem can be a very hard thing to do. However, without accepting our faults, we cannot change them, and we live in a state of primitiveness, a state without growth. Let's imagine for a moment that every run-in with trauma or internal conflict can be demonstrated by a physical wound on your body. Now, oftentimes in this country, we like to mask our wounds with drug abuse, promiscuity, overinvestment in work, or other actions that lead to trauma, negligence, and other bad consequences for ourselves and for those around us. This only goes to show that masking a wound without examining it and cleaning it will only lead to a nasty infection. At the hospital, I actively participated in the treatment that they offered. I started to be courageous enough to be honest and discover my trauma. I was able to heal from it in a safe space with other people who were doing the same thing. Now, don't get me wrong, it wasn't like I just laid down on a couch, expressed all my feelings, and suddenly I was relieved. It was an ugly battle filled with heartbreak, shame, vulnerability, and many, many tears on my pillowcase. A critical point to this idea is that recovery is a lifelong process. We use the tools and resources we have to fight our battles daily, and sometimes we go backwards. That is why it is called recovery, rather than being recovered. Now, I would like to introduce you all to someone that we all know. This person, like some of us here today, has been ignoring its internal traumas while trying to conduct a peaceful life. And because of it, we've all been dealing with the negative consequences. This person is America. Yes, our beloved country. No matter if you are black, white, left, right, or somewhere lost in the middle of everything like me, one thing most of us can agree on is that if 2020 accomplished anything at all, it exposed the many, many wounds that this country needs to address in order to heal and move forward. So how do we do this? Philosophers, politicians, and hate-filled Facebook groups have struggled for years to find the answer to our country's destructive patterns. But just as I had to look inward at my past trauma in order to heal, this country must look inward at its brutal history to see how the consequences are still affecting people today. One solution I offer this country to navigate through this storm is that of which I call universal love. What is universal love? It's this idea that we act with love at the forefront of our minds every single day while considering love for oneself, love for humanity, love for your community, love for the earth, and love for life and the higher powers that you may believe in. Now, I could probably spend a whole separate TED Talk really going into this idea, but for the purpose of today, I just want to focus on the first two. The love of self is pretty self-explanatory. However, I really want to stress the importance of this. Mental Health America reports that our youth is struggling the most with mental health, and it is worsening year after year. If our youth is learning self-hate at such a young age, we must create a new norms of teaching self-love at a young age to combat this crisis. For me, self-love was always just a word that people said, but it wasn't until I started practicing it every day that I was able to heal. The love of humanity is the one that I think that the media and money holders have allowed us to lose sight of the most. The love of humanity demonstrates that although I may not look like you or agree with you, I will still choose love to guide me to understand your perspective. I will still choose love to allow me to truly hear what you have to say about your experiences and allow me to reflect in ways I may be impacting them. It wasn't until I started practicing the love of humanity that I was able to let go of the resentment that I had towards both sides of my family and live free from the chains of negative thoughts and feelings I had long battled inside my head. Now, I know this idea of universal love can be kind of funky, kind of weird, but the core takeaway is that if we condition our brains to love rather than to react in hate, we may be able to create a better country without needing the signatures of political congressmen who profit off of our disconnection within this country. As I conclude today, I want to challenge you all not to strive for happiness. I know you're probably thinking, what? How are you going to tell us not to try to be happy after all of this? Well, if we're being honest, most of us don't know what the heck that really looks like anyway. Our perspectives are often distorted by what the media tells us happiness is and what we should strive for in life. But I argue that rather than striving for happiness, we should strive for self-awareness. It is only with honest self-awareness that we can look at the masked wounds we have long denied and ignored in our country and possibly in our day-to-day lives. Only with this heartbreaking, shameful, vulnerable sense of self-awareness, with the application of universal love, can we as individuals and we as a united nation begin to heal and move forward. To quote the great Dr. King, "Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that." Thank you.